From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. Another busy day in the Alabama legislature as the House and Senate met for the 12th legislative day. And the topic of the day was the issue that has dominated state and national headlines for the last week: in vitro fertilization and the predicament facing clinics and patients in the wake of the recent Alabama Supreme Court ruling saying frozen embryos are to be considered children under state law. That ruling led to several fertility clinics, including the UAB health systems, to halt their IVF treatments because of the risk of being sued. Both the House and the Senate spent most of the day debating legislation that aims to address this issue by offering limited legal protections to clinics and prospective parents. While there was bipartisan consensus that action should be taken to allow IVF to continue, there were some disagreements among Republicans and Democrats about how far those protections should go and whether or not to address the more fundamental question of personhood. We'll start in the House, where legislation from Representative Terry Collins was considered.
This is about a liability immunity. It's not what we want to do. It's not going to long-term do it. We're going to continue need to work together to fix the problem. But right now, we were wanting to get the clinics open for the families to be using them, and this does that.
Does this have a sunset time?
It does not have a sunset.
What happened to that?
The reason is because the process for in vitro fertilization is longer sometimes than that sunset date, and that would mess it up. And so the sunset date was as much for us to be responsible and come back and do the right thing to make a long-term fix, but that's why the sunset date was taken out.
Okay, the reasoning we had for slowing this down was unintended consequences.
Yes.
And as the majority of the people in the room when we talked were for having an escape clause to keep us from getting locked into unintended consequences.
Right.
So that escape clause is no longer in there since we do not have
we
a sunset
still
time.
have most of the session left to continue to watch for that. It has been changing. It's been changing every day, trying to get different groups to agree on things. We still have 2 more legislative days to work on this, but it takes 5 days for us to pass legislation. My goal is to keep this moving because this is a bill that we can use to take care of the families that are going through that process right now.
That bill, House Bill 237, passed 94-6 with 3 abstaining. Similar legislation was debated in the Senate, where that debate lasted for about 3 hours. Senators adopted amendments to the bill that would limit those legal protections for clinics to ensure that patients have the proper right of recourse. The legislation was carried by Senator Tim Melson.
This is tough. I mean, you have, we all value the life, but it's hard to put a value on the life, right? And so these embryos that the clinics are losing, they don't want to lose them. I mean, for numerous reasons, both moral and financial. They want to be successful, and we'll see what happens in the future.
Never thought they'll see this moment in time of history in this state. Old precious Alabama, old conservative Alabama, supermajority Republican Party would put the women they say they love in this position. Never thought about it because it's a bunch of men who decided that they're going to say what a woman should do with her body.
As you have already acknowledged, we can't fix it here today. If we are not fixing the problem that we created, tell me what we're doing.
Yeah, it's giving immunity. We give immunity all the time of things that are in the Constitution, and it doesn't require an amendment to the Constitution to trade it.
That bill, Senate Bill 159, passed unanimously. So where are we in this process? It takes 5 legislative days for a bill to become a law. Today was day 3 of that process. the bills will go to the other chambers for committee consideration on Tuesday, with the earliest possible final passage on Wednesday. And because what the House and Senate passed were slightly different, a conference committee to iron out the differences could be needed. Another important thing to note, these bills are meant to specifically address the IVF liability issue in order to get clinics operational again. Many on both sides acknowledge that additional legislation addressing the more long-term fallout from the ruling might be necessary. Of course, we will continue to keep you up to date with the latest here on Capitol Journal. This IVF issue is one that no one expected to come up this legislative session, and certainly not to consume so much time and attention. House Speaker Nathaniel Ledbetter said today that while it has been important to address that issue, he's looking forward to it being dealt with so the House can focus on other issues.
We wanted to try to get things out there and get them moving pretty quickly. And some issues that the Senate and the House both wanted to look at was part of the reason. To be quite honest with you, we're probably going to do 2 days this week before this IVF thing come up. And enable us to open the legislature. As you know the process, we have to have 3 readings on the bill because we got to have the journal open when we read, which means we got to be in session when we start the process. So that's really why we went 3 days this week. Our goal was to scale back, but me and the Pro Tem thought this was an important piece of legislation that needed to be passed, and rightfully so. I think we did the right thing. I actually asked some of the members, and I asked the leadership, is this what we need to do moving forward? And it was a consensual yes. Every time we pass a bill, there's unintended consequences. It doesn't matter if we're meeting 3 days a week or 5 days a week. I mean, that's just part of the process. And, statutorily, we can correct those issues if it becomes a big problem. But all these bills have been vetted. We gave the committees more time now and more power to vet them in committee. So I think the process has moved very well if you consider the heavy lift that's been going on for the first part of the session.
And there was a similar sentiment in the Senate. Minority Leader Bobby Singleton said that body is ready to move on to other issues. He particularly mentioned gambling. He said he supports the lottery, casino, and sports betting package passed by the House, but he expects the Senate to make changes to that plan or substitute their own gambling package.
Well, look here. I have not been in on all the conversations. I've been around here for 20 plus years. I, introduced one of the first bingo bills that got passed for Greene and Macon County back in 2002. I think that we got a lot of people who are in the room who really don't understand the process, who really don't understand what's going on. And I must admit that I did meet with them, and there are some things being put on the table. Hopefully that over the weekend that we can come back with a draft, put it in committee by Tuesday, and be something that we can vote on. I like what the House put out. If we can take what the House did and move it forward, but right now it doesn't seem that that's going to be the issue here. Be the solution. So what we need to do is just to come up with something where everybody's included. I have not read what it is, but I do understand that there may be something coming on Tuesday. I think it's a rewrite, personally. I think it's a rewrite from what the House has passed, but I have not seen it, so therefore I can't be certain of what it is. I'm going to be advocating for what the House passed. That's what I'll be advocating for.
It really has been a wild week here in the State House. Be sure to watch our Capitol Journal Week in Review show on Friday to catch up with all that has gone on here. Some breaking news this evening. U.S. Senator Katie Britt has been tapped to deliver the Republican response to President Joe Biden's State of the Union address. That's scheduled for Thursday, March 7th, a week from today. It's a high honor for the first-term senator, and it will put her in the national spotlight. House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said they jointly decided that Britt was the right choice to deliver a Republican response to Biden. They specifically cited her story as the youngest Republican woman elected to the Senate and the only Republican mother of school-aged children as a uniquely effective narrative to connect with everyday Americans. We will certainly be watching for that and look forward to having Senator Britt back on the show in the coming weeks. When we come back, more on the IVF issue with Senator Larry Stutts, who offers a unique perspective on the proposed legislation as an OBGYN doctor. Stay with us.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Created by the U.S. Congress on May 18, 1933, the Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA, is the nation's largest public power company and a world-renowned regional development agency. It operates hydroelectric dams and coal-fired and nuclear power plants in northern Alabama and other southern states. TVA also manages the Tennessee River for flood control, navigation, recreation, and water quality.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. Joining me next is State Senator Larry Stutts. Senator, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on today.
Well, it was an interesting day in the Senate. Y'all passed this bill dealing with in vitro fertilization. I know this is a topic pretty close to you given your profession as an obstetrician, right? So talk about what actually passed and how it can help solve this crisis that has become really just in the last couple of weeks.
Well, what the bill that we passed today simply provided some civil and criminal protections for people involved in the IVF process. And I think in view of the Supreme Court ruling, we had to do something. We had to make a statement, and because of the concern, but we didn't need to make it so broad that we don't also, you might say, leave room for error. If a patient is truly wrong, if practice outside the standard of care occurs, then you should not be protected. So what we were trying to protect with this bill was if you're doing the normal things that you do in vitro fertilization, then you're protected from civil and criminal immunity.
Yeah, that's the concern I heard from.
You are immune from prosecution, not protected from immunity.
Right. Yeah, I get you. And that's what I kept hearing from Senator Coleman Madison and some others saying, yeah, we can't have this too broad because there are legit claims that somebody could make. There are legit lawsuits that could be brought for malfeasance, for problems in that process. So do you think the amendments that were added will cover that and take care of that too broad issue?
I think so, primarily. I think that we should have used the bill that I had because I simply said if you're practicing within the usual and customary areas of IVF, then you're immune from these issues. In other words, with my bill, what you were doing last month, you can be doing right now. But we tried to get into, and that's why we've spent the last 3 hours in the chamber debating about life and embryos and debating when life begins and all those things. And my point is that's settled. We settled that in 2019 with a pro-life bill. And for the current situation, all we needed to do was say, you can keep doing what you've been doing without fear of prosecution. So initially the bill that ended up passing was too broad, and we narrowed it down with some amendments. We offered a substitute, and the substitute took out some of the things that were too broad, and then we had this additional amendment today to take out the word goods so that if you were providing supplies for it and your supplies were defective, then you weren't immune from liability.
I see.
So,
well, the process isn't over though, because this is different now than what the House has passed. So there could be a conference committee, there could be back and forth. So do you see in the negotiations that will continue next week, maybe getting some of your bill's language added back?
My bill was 2 sentences long, so there's really nothing to add back. Just if you were doing this before, you can still do it. But this bill is something we can absolutely work with. I'm not sour grapes of not passing my bill.
Sure.
I wanted to fix the issue. I'm just saying I think we made the issue more complicated than it had to be.
Well, you mentioned personhood, the constitutional amendment, and all that. And I mean, I've talked with plenty of legal experts who say, yes, the statute is enough. We don't need a constitutional amendment just on this very specific issue of IVF and allowing the clinics to operate without liability. However, don't the Democrats have a point in that this could crop back up? Another lawsuit makes its way up, and as long as that amendment is worded the way it is, with when life begins and protections for pro-life, until that is changed or altered, won't we be back in this situation again?
Oh, we very well could be. Things work their way through the court system, and and in defense of that, I think the Supreme Court rightly decided the issue. I mean, if we're debating over these embryos and in vitro fertilization dying, then we have to admit they were alive. What were you before you died? You were alive. And if it's alive, then what kind of life is it? And so
what kind of protections?
Right, what kind of protections does it deserve? Because if we agree it's a life, it clearly has to be a human life. It's not potential life, or someone tried to debate with me yesterday that well, these embryos, if we laid them right here on this ledge, they could not survive, right? And I said, yeah, that's true. But I said, we can make exactly the same argument for if we laid a 1-month-old baby on this floor, it couldn't survive if we just laid it there and left it. And I said, so the only issue is that either of them require is temperature control and nutrition and time. And so the debate, to me, in my mind, the debate of when a life begins, it begins at conception. And so I'm very comfortable with defending that, but also defending the practice of in vitro fertilization. I mean, as you know, I'm an OBGYN doctor. I've done a lot of infertility stuff, but referred a lot of patients for in vitro fertilization. And yeah, there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. But if you do it the right way, then you don't have to argue over all these moral issues. The in vitro fertilization practices that are doing it the right way, they're not trying to destroy embryos. They're trying to create embryos. Mm-hmm. And we need to realize that.
I guess that's the thing, is that the question over when life begins, at conception. I guess that's the thing, is that if you draw that out to its logical conclusion, sometimes then you get rulings like this, and you get well, we have to treat every frozen embryo as a child and things like that. Are you saying that there are kind of just different classes, different laws should apply differently in different stages of life? Is that kind of what you mean, or is it just simply a best practices kind of thing?
Oh, I think it's best practices, because if you really practice, one of the real principles of medicine is first do no harm. And if you really practice the right type of infertility medicine, you stay out of all these situations. You don't try to implant a whole bunch of embryos. You maybe selectively fertilize only so many eggs. You talk to your patient ahead of time about these issues and say, would you be comfortable donating any extra embryos that you have? And if they say no, then we're not going to fertilize extra embryos. Mm-hmm. And so with a little bit of planning ahead and discussing these issues ahead of time, if you're really a good infertility practice, you keep yourself out of those situations.
Well, again, you're an OBGYN, and that's interesting in this discussion. And in fact, it was interesting in committee. You and Chairman Melson are both medical doctors, so y'all know your stuff on this. Is there anything that you've seen out there reported that is getting it wrong, like you would kind of want to clear up as a doctor that knows something about these issues?
Well, that infertility doctors' practices in general are not doing the right thing. The vast, vast majority of them are. The vast majority of them are practicing ethical medicine. They're trying to help their patients. They're trying to help their patients get pregnant. All the things that we think of with IVF, and the vast, vast majority of them are doing it exactly right. And the ones that overreacted of we're suspending our practice, we're stopping, we can't do this, we'll be charged with murder. That's not the case. That was
so you
a
think
major
that was an overreaction?
That was an absolute overreaction to try to weaponize this decision, this court decision. I said, I think the court decision was right, and if you do the right thing, you're not going to find yourself in these positions.
That's interesting. Well, what's the feedback been? Every lawmaker I talk to say they've heard from folks they've never, heard from before, and a lot. And kind of surprising how many families are involved in this right now. Has it been the same for you?
Oh, it has, yeah. I've gotten hundreds and hundreds of emails, and like I said, I expected it. If you look at the real data, now they don't all have IVF, but about 10% of the population has an infertility issue. So it's not something that's rare. It's something that in medical practice you deal with all the time, and when 10% of the population is affected by infertility, now some of them are very simple and don't end up at the end of the process having IVF, but that's still a large number of people that have been impacted by infertility to some degree. And so yeah, I'm not surprised to hear from a lot of people.
Yeah, it has been interesting just how wide this story has become. Let me go back to the whole thing about liability. I've heard one solution could be waivers, a waiver that you would sign, for a clinic, freeing them from liability, on infertility. Would that be a fix to this, or does it?
Well, I'm obviously not a lawyer, and I don't know. If you
is that something that you would even consider as a?
You sign, a permit before surgery, and it explains some of the things that could go wrong. And again, in infertility practice, you're going to address these things on the front end of talking to your patient, and the very fact that they're at that point, they already know they had trouble getting pregnant, or they wouldn't be at the point of IVF. So I don't know if the waivers would. Said again, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know if that kind of waiver stands up in court, or if you again, my personal philosophy is you deal that with just one-on-one communication. I look you in the eye and tell you this is what could go wrong, this is what we're going to try to do, and not try to outline every possible thing in some kind of waiver, because you can always find something that wasn't in the waiver.
That's what lawyers do.
Right.
Well, look, thank you for your time today. This is an issue we're following very closely, and I appreciate your expertise and your time to come on the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me on anytime.
Absolutely. We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
Tuscumbia native Helen Keller is popularly remembered as the deaf and blind child who learned sign language from her teacher Ann Sullivan at the Keller home, Ivy Green. But during her adult life, she was a tireless activist on behalf of workers and women's rights, a prolific author, and an unofficial U.S. ambassador to the world. Her most famous publication is her best-selling 1903 autobiography, The Story of My Life. Through her work with the American Foundation for the Blind, Keller advocated for broadened educational and employment possibilities for blind people, and the State Department funded her international travel and advocacy of people with disabilities. In 1964, President Lyndon Johnson awarded her the Congressional Medal of Freedom. A bronze statue depicting a young Helen Keller represents Alabama in the U.S. Capitol, and she is featured on our state quarter.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. Hope you'll join us tomorrow night for Capital Journal's Week in Review. But make a note, the show will start a little later than normal. We're proud to be airing the Alabama High School Basketball Championships on APT, and those games are scheduled to go until 8 o'clock Friday. That's if there's no overtime, of course. So we'll be on the air following the final game. For our Capital Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.